As we forge forward and continue working with Indigenous nations, we want to first acknowledge, respect, and recognize the deep connection and historical relationship between Indigenous people and the land they are connected. Land was stolen, many Indigenous people were killed intentionally, First Nations cultures, languages, and traditions were also decimated due to cultural genocide. We acknowledge that colonization, residential schools, and the 60s scoop and other factors have significantly undermined Indigenous cultures. With support, accountability, and much respect to the Indigenous peoples we work with within Southwest Ontario and of London. The following traditional territories are Anishinaabe, which also includes Ojibwe or Chippewa Nation, Haudenosaunee, which also known as the Iroquois, which includes Oneida Nation, Lenape, also known as the Delaware, Attawandaron, also known as Neutral, and the Wendat, also known as the Huron. The land in the area we call London is the traditional territory of the Chippewa of the Thames, the Oneida of the Thames, and the Munsee Delaware Nation. There are 11 First Nations communities in the region of Southwest Ontario and over 120 in the province as a whole. With much respect, we must embrace the concepts of significant cultural concepts of traditional ways of knowing to the needs of an autonomy and integrity to the Indigenous families we provide services. Whenever possible, we strive to respect all cultural, religious, and regional differences among our Indigenous children's cultural heritage and concepts of extended family.
Great, thank you. Just before we get going, perhaps myself and Katie and Wendy can just do a quick introduction. We were just waiting till everybody was on. But so my name is Louise Vandenbosch. I do both child protection mediation and family group conferencing. Wendy?
Yep. So good morning. My name's Wendy. I'm a Bay Quinte Mohawk and with some Anishinaabe roots at the same time. Married into a Cree family, so we got about 3 First Nations in this family. And anyways, happy to be here. I've been a worker all my life and have been providing circles across Canada, mostly in Ontario, for about the last 16 years. So good to meet you.
Perfect. And I'm Katie Anderson. I work at the London Family Court Clinic and I oversee the ADR-Link program.
Great, thanks. So today what we're going to do is, I think many of you might have been part of the basic ADR overview that we have done. And so this one is where we call it a bit of a deeper dive. So Wendy and I and Katie are really going to talk to you a little bit more about some of the things we just touched on briefly at the basic. So we're going to talk a little bit about this notion of family engagement strategies and how some of those strategies are internal to the Children's Society and some are external, such as the prescribed ADR methods that we're going to talk about, and the importance of being able to move from one strategy to another. We're also going to talk about youth-led family group conferencing, and we'll tip our hat over to Amanda Lal at the Toronto FGC project, who has, we've actually used with permission, Amanda's chart here today. And then we'll talk about ADR and youth in care, especially the VISES, and then we'll talk about openness in adoption, the high conflict custody and access matters, and ADR throughout the life of the case in both FGCP, CPM, and ODR. All right, so that's where we're at today. Oops. And we are free, you are free to ask us any questions that you need to. You can either put them in the chat or you can just shout them out, whatever you like. We will respond to both. We are recording today's session. We want backup sessions or backup recordings just in case one time we're either Wendy or myself or Katie is not available. So that's why we're recording today's session. So thanks for your permission to do so. So over to you, Katie, for the stat.
Sure. So I'll just go over briefly some of the stats from 2008 up until the end of the previous fiscal year, which was March 31st, 2021. You'll see by the stats here how much the program has grown since 2008. We've kind of peaked around 2013, 2014, 2015, took a slight drop in 2016, 17, and then slowly we're gaining back momentum for the past 2 fiscal years. You'll see the colors there are divided up by method of ADR. So we have child protection mediation, family group conferencing, ODR, original dispute resolution, or Indigenous dispute resolution, as it's sometimes called, and the 4th option. You'll see in the last probably about 5-6 years that the child protection mediations seem to be the most popular method of referrals as of late, although overall family group conferencing and child protection mediation have about an equal amount. It tends to go one way or the other, where one becomes more popular than the other, but overall it evens out. But yeah, that just shows the growth in the program.
You're muted, Louise.
I saw that, yeah. So thanks, Katie. One of the things that we've always thought about is ensuring that when you're referring to an ADR program, that you actually offer the full array of services to a family and really listen to what they have to say about what will work for them. So sometimes it's really a good idea to do a child protection mediation over a family group conference from sort of the worker's perspective or the society's perspective. But sometimes the family says, you know what, this particular way of working works better for me. And that really has to be taken into account quite seriously, because when we're looking at perhaps in family group conferencing, when we're looking at widening the circle, if a family doesn't want their other family members there, it's probably not a method that's going to work for them, even though it might make sense to the referring worker. And similarly, if a family is made a referral to child protection mediation and they're saying, actually, I want to just discuss this amongst my family, and so then it is an appropriate referral for family group conferencing, even though you might think, well, that topic can be done more easily in a child protection mediation. So taking into account the family's preference is really important. And of course, if it's a family who has some Indigenous heritage, it's really important to help them understand their option of using a circle, right? So those things are very important to make sure that families actually have a say in their choice. When we're talking about voice and choice in the work that we do with families, it starts from the very first time when we're offering services. So I think that's pretty crucial to the work that we do.
Thanks for clarifying that, Louise. So the total number of referrals is 1,849. That's from 2008 up to March 31st, 2021. So we've had a total of 875 child protection mediation referrals, 790 family group conferencing referrals, 146 original dispute resolution referrals, and 38 referrals for the 4th option.
Great. And Katie, can you just speak to sort of how we're doing this first quarter?
Yeah, so the first quarter, I believe we are right around the same amount as we had this time last year. I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but we are well underway. I want to say we have 100 plus referrals coming in. So we definitely haven't slowed down due to COVID. We definitely are still up and running as normal, just doing things more on a virtual platform.
Great, thanks. So I had wanted to just talk to you a little bit about this family involvement continuum. And this is based on the work of Marie Connolly, who's a researcher from New Zealand. And as many of you know, a lot of the family involvement thinking has come out of New Zealand. And so when we think about kin services, family finding, family group conferencing, family meetings, family networks, all of these originate out of the work that was done back in the 1980s in New Zealand. And that work continues to be extremely important, not only here in Ontario, but across the globe. And people are in the system are really paying attention to that work. So this is copyrighted to American Humane. American Humane was the organization that was responsible in the US for a family group conferencing, and then all of the other sort of other programs that sort of were spin-offs of family group conferencing. They have now changed to the Kemp Center, but anyways, my sheet still says American Humane. So this continuum was devised by Marie Connolly, and it's really trying to get the understanding around that both the family's voice and the system's voice are important in decision making. Sometimes the family's voice may have more weight given the nature of the decision, and sometimes the system's voice may have more weight given the nature of the decision. And it's really important when we're thinking of a particular program to understand where it fits on this continuum. And it's important to know that we can move from one area of the continuum to another area of the continuum, but we should be mindful of when we're moving from those in between these different programs. So if we think about family voice being very elevated in decision making, what we're looking at is processes where the families, along with their support network, craft the initial plans that are subsequently shared with the professionals who work collaboratively with the family to ensure it is attainable and meets the highest standards for achieving the goals of safety, permanency, and well-being. So very often, this is where we're thinking that family group conferencing places, right? So if for those of you who are familiar with family group conferencing, you will know that the family actually meets privately for a good portion of the day. So that's them with their support network. They're crafting that initial plan. They share that plan back with the professionals who are present, and then the plan is further refined. But this is where the family's voice is quite elevated in the decision making. We move further down the continuum. We're looking at families are part of the decision making team. In these instances, families partner with professionals to create consensual decisions acceptable to all parties. So what we're seeing is that a lot of children's aid societies are doing signs of safety, family network meetings. There's rapid response meetings. They're all part of that type of process, right? So these are very often, and even child protection mediation I'd put here, right? So people are sitting together around the same table. It's not that the family goes off and crafts the plan and then comes back. So that's a distinction. As we move further down the continuum, we start to see probably a more equal balance between family voice and system voice. And families will have a genuine voice at their meetings. Their ideas, needs, perspectives, and other inputs are sought at the meetings, but the decision-making rests with professionals. And I'm not sure what types of meetings they might be these days. Maybe somebody might have an idea and you can put it into the chat. It could be that it might be a signs of safety meeting. And then, during that meeting, the professionals have to say, you know what, we've heard you, but we're going to have to make a decision here, right? And certainly I've been part of many of those meetings over my years of working where, there will be a meeting with the family, but then the professionals will have to make a decision. And sometimes that decision is that a child is being brought into care, given some of the information that was shared at the meeting. So the next one down is families are present at the meetings where the decisions will be made about their children. I don't think that it's happening that much these days. Certainly we're moving away from that a lot, especially as agencies are adopting signs of safety and more of these family decision-making models. And then the last is that the system voice, where the system voice is quite elevated in that families are not included in the meetings or other forums where decisions are made about their children. And I think those types of meetings are still going on, especially when people are, or the societies are making decisions about whether a child needs to be brought into care. There are perhaps senior managers or directors of service having conversations about that and making that decision. So, so what we're wanting people to think about is when they start to engage one of the prescribed ADR services, when you're doing that, you're actually using an external facilitator. And there's lots of good reasons to use an external facilitator. That person is fresh eyes. They are not part of the decision-making process. They really sit outside of that, and they're not part of the child welfare system. So sometimes that really helps families in terms of engaging with a process, right? They can say, all right, this person is neutral, they're impartial here. And that really helps. And the other thing that I think is important to think about is that, so sometimes you may say, well, we're already doing some internal processes. You might be running some signs of safety meetings. When is it an appropriate time to perhaps, kick that over to an external facilitator, right? Either a family group conferencing coordinator, an Indigenous ADR practitioner, a child protection mediator. When is it the appropriate time to do that? And there's lots of good reasons why you might say, you know what, let's bring in somebody who's external right now. Let's bring in somebody with some fresh eyes, and let's try and have a different type of meeting. You may then bring it back into an internal meeting within the Children's Aid Society once you have a plan, and you might continue on with Family Network. So I often have referrals, and I'm sure Wendy does too, where there's already been internal meetings at the Children's Aid Society. There's a decision made to make it to become an external meeting, and then it might go back into an internal meeting. And so that going back and forth between external facilitators and internal facilitators should be part of your thinking as you're saying, when is a good time to make a referral, and how can we assist this family to move it along. If you feel like you're kind of getting stuck there, it may be a good time to move it along. I think Wendy's probably going to speak about this in a minute, but very often it's best to think about, for some families, using an external facilitator right from the get-go. They might not have some good trust in the system. So there are lots of reasons to think about that. And we want people to think about that. These are tools in your toolkit as workers who are working with families, and that you do not have to think that they're in competition. They are not. They're all part of the continuum of service. And we would like people to really think about that when they are making referrals. How can this help? And I think everybody knows, but if you are a CS worker, there is a legal obligation for you to consider ADR. So I think maybe I'll come back to that. Oh, no, hang on, maybe not. So let me talk a little, what I'm going to do, I'm going to stop the share for a second. I'm going to maybe turn it over to you, Wendy, give myself a break. Why don't you talk a little bit about original dispute resolution and some of the things that you would like people to think about.
Okay. So first of all, I'd like to share my understanding of original dispute resolution. I do not see it as alternative dispute resolution, or has, the umbrella it's been put under, in my opinion. And as most Indigenous people know, that, we've met in a circle since Creator placed us here on Mother Earth to talk about our stuff. So anyways, that's how I look at original dispute resolution. I also believe that if you have an Indigenous case, that you make that referral right away to ODR. As you know, our families do not have a lot of trust in the system. And that's what practitioners like myself, my co-workers, that's what we can offer. You know, we're Indigenous ourselves. I mean, you know, we've kind of walked the same walk they have. And we can really be a comfort to people. You know, I also believe it's very, very hard for a non-Indigenous person to explain the circle and the circle process. So if, you know, if that's the case, let's say you're working with a family and you're trying to get across, you're trying to make that referral, what you can do is you can contact Katie, and then she can put in or refer you an Indigenous worker just to explain the process to the family. And that goes a long way. That can go a very long way, because it's all about trust. That circle is all about trust. The circle is also about, you know, building those relationships and in the best interest of those children and of that family. One of the other things we spend a lot of time doing is in the preparation phase. You know, I've heard workers say, well, if we refer out, you know, it's going to take months. Well, sometimes it does. I mean, if you have a family that's been involved with the court system for 5, 6 years, or with the society for a long time, darn right, it takes us a long time. I mean, we've got to go in and we've got to build that trust. In my opinion, it's not at the actual circle where you get the great outcomes. It's in the preparation phase. It's about helping people feel safe. And the other thing in original dispute resolution is we meet the family where they're at, right? So we're not going to, let's say a family identifies Indigenous, but they don't know anything about their Indigenous First Nation. So, you know, so we're going to go in and we're going to help build that. We're going to help build their self-esteem. You know, we're going to validate their experience. You know, we are impartial, but, you know, I think it'd be, I'm Indigenous, so how can I be fully impartial? You know, I love our families and I want our families to have that voice. And we can have a circle just about anything. You know, I have partnerships out in some areas in Southern Ontario, and it's just like a well-oiled machine. You know, that agency identifies the Indigenous individual, and then we got this whole mechanism just goes into place, right? Original dispute resolution is just not about a circle. It's also about building all those helpers within your community to help those people, right? And that takes a lot of work. So original dispute resolution is a much bigger process than what ADR is. It's our process. Sometimes it's very hard to help Indigenous families understand the benefit of coming into a circle. You know, they might not like their community, or they might, you know, all those things. But I can tell you one thing, you get them in there and it doesn't take long until they're coming out the other side and saying, oh man, am I ever glad I did this? Because we're going to facilitate their voice being heard, right? And it's their plan. It's like I telling them, you know, why do you let CS drive the bus? You know what? You drive the bus. I mean, you know your kid better than anybody else. You know your family better than anybody else. You know right from wrong. Despite any mistakes you made, you know right from wrong. So why can't you drive the bus and make these plans and drawing people together? And then they'll say, you know, well, I don't like my dad, or I don't like my mom, or my auntie's pushy, or whatever. And that's the stuff I start reassuring them. Well, you know, I say to them, well, I can help with that. You know, what's going to make you comfortable? You know, what is going to help for you to stand up in that circle and really speak your heart? You know, so we go through all of that. also in the ODR process is sometimes we have the lawyers in there. And they, society lawyers, band lawyers, band reps, and we all meet just in a big circle. There's no family private time. The family just works it out right in the circle. It's just one big conversation. If we have families that are saying to me, no friggin' way, am I going to stand in that circle? Then I will separate them. But what I'm looking for is if the family wants to do the planning on their own, that's fine. But I need to be assured there's some leadership in that family and that they are going to create that plan. Because sometimes when you put families together, it's just another big fight, right? So I try to be sure that if the family's going to do the plan and we're going to present that back, that there's leadership in the family to do that and to make that plan very solid. The circles, we've done forensic circles. A lot of our children will not talk to police. In those cases, we bring in the elders and the helpers and the healers. We work with the children, and then I will facilitate that forensic circle, right? The children trust us, they know us. When you work in a community, the community gets to know you. Particularly if you've been in the community for a very long time, there's trust there. So there's lots that we can do. Circles. One really big thing I'd like to mention is because so many of our families have to do some healing in order, to be the best parent they can be. That they've got to do the work for that, right? And like I said, we're going to wrap the healers around them. I'm going to ask CS to stand down when we do that healing. I don't believe the state should be involved in that healing process. I believe it's intimidating. So I would bring the family in together with the healers or the seers or our helpers, and we do that healing piece. I also have a trauma counselor that I work with constantly, and she's at many of the circles. So she's helping keep an eye out for people that are going to have a hard time at the circle or a hard time after the circle. I believe all those things in a circle that really need to be addressed on a very deep level. And that's because of our experience in child welfare or our experience in just colonization overall. That response of fight, flee, freeze is really big in our Indigenous communities. So you got to take care of that. Our folks have been systemically oppressed for a very long time. So you got to address those things. I've had some workers say, well, if we're just doing the healing, then we're not going to get the outcome. And I shoot back, if you do the healing, you're going to get the outcome naturally. If you go in half-assed backwards and just want the outcome and not even deal with the healing, it's just a crazy tumbleweed from there. You got to do the healing piece. That's really important. And our folks do not need to heal in front of you. We bring in our own folks for that. And we're going to get them standing up and we're going to get them talking. And then we'll bring you together with them. So those cases work out really well. For high conflict cases, I'll still bring in that elder. I have an elder on nearly at every circle. And sometimes the conflict resolution is traditional conflict resolution in that circle. It just depends on the case. And I say to my coworkers, it's kind of like we're chameleons. It's kind of like every referral we get, we're just we're going to figure out where we fit. It's not where they fit for you. And it's like I say to families, when I reach out my hand, it's not necessarily a hand of friendship. It's a hand to pull you up. So here's my hand. This is what the circle can do to you, for you and your family. And I'm going to pull you up out of this. And you hang with us. And we'll get your kids back. We will. but you got to work with us, right? I can't be working harder than you. And in original dispute resolution, like I said, it's you have those very close relationship with those other helpers in the community. So it's not just me doing that helping. It's going to be that whole network that's doing that helping. You know, because once my referral is over, then I've got to walk away, right? So I want people in place that are going to be that continuity. I have grandmothers sometimes I'll send in, just community grandmothers that are going to connect to a grandmother that's raising her grandchildren, just to build that support network, to build knowledge, to build understanding. So, I mean, I could go on forever about the deeper understandings of original dispute resolution, but I'll leave it there for now.
Great, thanks, Wendy. And it is really helpful to understand, I think, all the small nuances, right, about the circles. And I think what Wendy had said in the beginning was, right, if you're having a difficult time or just want extra support to explain what the circle's about, contact Katie over at ADR-Link, and she'll send Wendy or one of her colleagues out, and they'll do the explaining. And then you can get the consent signed. But it sometimes it's in how it gets explained is how you can get the buy-in. And Wendy does a good job of explaining it. And if you can just imagine if it's an Indigenous family and they meet Wendy for the first time, it's a different experience for them. So really encourage you to think about that. And it's true for all of the processes, but sometimes I think it's easier to explain some of the more mainstream processes than it is for the Indigenous process. And it might be a good idea to get off on the right foot to explain it so you can get good buy-in. So, because I think Wendy's right, like sometimes what I get referrals for people who are Indigenous and they're like, I'm not going to do an Indigenous circle. And I think, oh, I wonder how that got explained to you. And I try, but I don't do the same. I don't do it the same justice that Wendy could do. So. So thanks for that. Katie, do you want to just, while we're just on the topic of thinking about working with Indigenous families, can you just speak to ADR-Link's process in terms of accepting those referrals from Indigenous communities?
Sure. So like what Wendy spoke about, sometimes there are trust issues with families and CAS, or just the relationship is not good, and they are not as willing to listen to CAS's suggestion about taking place in an ODR referral. So we do recognize that. One of the things that we've done to try to reduce that barrier is to accept referrals directly from Indigenous community members. So a First Nations band rep, a well-being agency, anyone really that's connected with that family can go. They can actually access the paperwork from our website, which we'll post at the end of this presentation, but they can go ahead and initiate that referral process rather than it being the other way around with CAS having to initiate it. So if anyone is on the line now and is from one of those agencies and has questions about how to make that referral, how to help the families, you can always just contact me and we can walk through that together. Sometimes it's a matter of me connecting with CAS to get them to fill out some paperwork and get you guys to fill out some paperwork as well. But it is possible to start the referral process directly from the Indigenous community and then just inform CAS that the process has been initiated and they're requested to join the ADR or the ODR. So that is something that we've kind of put in place for the last couple of years. And I just really encourage you guys to take advantage of that, because it is another way of getting your foot in the door, and it might make families more comfortable having the referral come directly from someone that they are more comfortable with.
Yeah, and I think that's been a really big shift for us in this region, and a most welcome shift. So that's been great. So if anyone have any questions for either Wendy or Katie? Again, you can just put them in the chat or shout them out. If there's no questions, then I'm going to speak a little bit about working with youth, because this is a big population who are involved with child welfare. So I'm just going to start the screen up again. So when we're thinking about working with youth, there really is, I think you have to think about working with youth differently. And when we're thinking about youth, we're probably thinking about 14 plus. For any youth, and I had this question the other day, but any youth who is even like 20, 21, 22, and they're still involved with the Children's Aid Society. They might be in extended society care. You could still make a referral for them for one of the methods of ADR. And so we are in the process of training our child protection mediators in the fall in a much more directed way to how they can work with youth. And I think that in the family group conferencing community, they've already done a lot of that work and have been quite successful at that. And so I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about the youth-led family group conferences and how they might look a little bit different than the traditional family group conference. So one of the things that Katie, if you make a referral, Katie will make sure that you've got consent signed. And when it's a conference or any of the ADRs really for a youth, if the parents are not available to consent or won't provide the consent, you can just go on the consent of the youth. So that's really important because, I remember a few summers back, I was working with a youth whose, it was actually an adoption breakdown, and his parents would not consent to ADR. And it was actually a family group conference, and he still wanted a relationship with his grandparents and his aunts and uncles, even though his relationship with his adopted parents had broken down, and they were not willing to consider having him part of their family again. He still wanted to be a part of this larger family. He had been part of that family since he was like 3. So we did bring we did do a family group for him, and we did a couple of conferences, couple of meeting days, and he really really desperately wanted these people to still be part of his life, and they were pretty good. Not all of them. Some of them were like, no, we're standing by your parents, but others were really good and really reached out to this youth, and we were able to create plans to keep that youth involved. So, but at the time when I couldn't get consent from the parents, I went back to the CS and I said, we can only get consent from the youth. Are you willing to still proceed? They checked with legal. They said, yes, we are willing to proceed. And so that's what we did. So the youth gets to identify the important people in his or her circle. And these can be professional supports. And these professional supports can be part of private family time. If it's everybody thinks that's a good idea, and indeed that's what the youth wants. So that's a real divergence from the traditional family group conference, where we're really quite protective about that private family time. But very often the youth, the important people in their lives are professional people. The people that they perhaps have they may have lost contact with their family, may not want contact with their family anymore. And so sometimes a teacher, a CS worker, a mental health counselor, that type of thing. They may be the people who this youth really relies on. So, so we really make that adjustment. I remember a couple of years ago, I was doing one for a youth, and this youth desperately, he was now in high school, but he had a very strong connection with his grade 8 teacher. And he said, can his grade 8 teacher come into the private time? Because he was having to stand up quite considerably to his family and make a big request. Anyways, that teacher agreed to do it, and the family, that's what the youth wanted, and so that's what happened. And the teacher, went in there as a support, not as a decision maker. And that really helped that youth create a plan. And so the youth got what he wanted, which was to live with an aunt and uncle. So that was an important piece. The coordinator has to be very creative in how they engage the youth. They have to use technology. They have to offer to meet beyond typical office hours, have multiple meetings. For those of you who work with youth a lot, know that it's not an easy population to work with in terms of, you may have a 10 o'clock scheduled and they might show up at 3, or they might show up at another day, or they may, so you got to be pretty flexible and very patient with the youth, and hoping that they will be able to work with you. So the work is not for everybody, because some people don't like that type of work, but for people who like working with youth and can really be flexible, it is good work. So this is, I think, the chart that Amanda had put together. So it really just shows the differences between the traditional FGC and the youth-led FGC. And, the youth really is the, as Wendy said, the driver of the bus. Really put the youth in the, what do you need? What are you thinking about? How can we help? And really get them to think about you making use of the ADR, and in this case, the family group conference. So. The ministry does have, for those of you who work with youth, there is a ministry policy directive around working with 16 to 17-year-olds, where there is an obligation upon the societies to inform the youth about their options to resolve any issue related to the youth or a plan for the youth's care, including access to alternative dispute resolution. And societies have to inform the youth about this at these 5 junctions. So at the signing of the VISA, the development of the Voluntary Youth Services Plan and reviews of that plan, placement changes upon admission to care by court order or temporary care agreement under Section 75, and upon request of the youth. And I think for many of you who work at Children's Aid Societies know that right now the ministry is undergoing a redesign of child welfare process, which is probably going to be a multi-year process. And when ADR came into being back in 2006, as part of those legislative changes, that was again a very major transformation of the system, and so they called that the transformation agenda. Now they're calling it the redesign, but there's a real emphasis now on working with youth and making sure that they have better outcomes, because the outcomes for youth who have been parented by the state are not so good, and so those things they're in the redesign, they're looking to really improve outcomes. There is an organization called Child Welfare PAC, and they've made a lot of inroads in terms of helping youth based on some evidence-based outcomes. One is they're trying to secure spots for youth who've been in care. at post-secondary universities. And I was talking to the woman the other day, and I think they have 210 spots now available for youth at universities or colleges. They also were instrumental in having the legislative changes in that the youth CS file is now a closed file. Before even when a youth became an adult, and I would be, have a referral from them, the Children's Aid Society would have disclosed to me information about that youth being a child in care. And so now that is going to be, they would no longer able to share that information. And there's 2 other areas that they're working on. But anyways, so they're really trying to push some of these evidence-based approaches so that there are better outcomes for youth as they exit care. So, and there's a big discussion around the exiting of care and whether that should be age-based or whether that should be when the youth is at a point of readiness. And then and part of those discussions is, well, who makes that determination as to when the youth is ready. So those are all the things that are kind of in the pipelines working their way through to take a look at some system change. I just want to now shift over and talk a little bit about openness in adoption. ADR is often used to develop openness agreements between the adopting family and the birth family. And Katie and I were at a meeting. Was that earlier this week? It might have been Katie, where the ministry rep was talking about how they actually have to sign off on all of the adoptions, and they often will see how ADR has been used to come to agreement around for openness. Most times, the openness arrangements do get made into court orders. They're not always, but the most times. When there is a request for openness in adoption and for ADR, and by and large, we are using child protection mediation to resolve those matters. The OCL is also notified, and depending on the age of the child, will become involved. If the parents are minor parents, they will always be involved. So, it's these agreements between families, they can be very complex, not in what they agree to, but in really the legal ramifications of it. So that, very often there will be deemed either the children or the parents are deemed access holders by the court through the extended society care order. And then depending on who is the access holder, it will depend on who can have an open, who has the right for openness. And so they can be quite a little complex and a bit tricky. For child protection mediators, we do offer an additional 2-day training leading to a specialization in openness. So, and I think most of the child protection mediators that are on the roster, I think Katie have that specialization. So we are seeing more and more referrals come in for openness. It's probably one of the main ways of using ADR. I think we will see this increase. There is a part of the CYFSA in section 207 talks about openness post adoption. So we're looking at ways to make sure that people have access to ADR even once the CS file is closed, because the adoption is finalized. This could be 5 years, 10 years down the road. So whenever there's a risk of adoption breakdown, have a feeling that, a strong feeling that, you know, we should really support these youth and these trying to make sure that whatever comes next, if the placement is not salvageable, what comes next for this youth, right? And try and start to assist them in doing some planning. So. The other way that we use ADR a lot is in these high conflict custody and access matters. For those of you who work at Children's Aid Society, you know that there's a big increase in traffic of these types of files that come to the attention of the Children's Aid Society. And there is either at intake or at ongoing, they make a decision that, you know, that perhaps that some ADR could be of assistance here. There is in these matters, there's a real potential for domestic violence and abuse of children. We see that over and over again. And there's a really strong, there's a strong component of allegations of abuse or neglect against former partners. Part of it becomes, can become part of the court matter where parents are trying to establish that the other parent is not as capable as parent, and so will often make allegations of abuse or neglect to the Children's Aid Society. So the Children's Aid Society has a very difficult job of deciding whether these allegations are founded or unfounded. But how we are using ADR to assist these matters is we are using either just child protection mediation or child protection mediation in combination with New Ways for Families. So New Ways for Families is a coaching program that's designed to help people in these high conflict situations. So we would have a New Ways for Families coach parents about how to mediate, how to make proposals during the mediation, respond to proposals, and really how to hammer out an agreement between the two parties. And very often what happens is that Children's Aid Society becomes the de facto parenting coordinator, and they're trying to figure out between the two parents what that might look like in terms of an order, and it gets just really messy. So we actually try and what we call build a team so that we can actually really help shift parents and shift the situation for the betterment for the children who are really caught in the middle of these high conflict matters between their parents. I just did a mediation on this week, and the parents they've been separated for over 10 years. They've come to the attention of the Children's Aid Society on numerous occasions. And really it's when the kids have just about had enough. And the kids have just through their children's lawyer had put together a list for this session about all the things they feel their parents aren't doing right in terms of co-parenting, and the parents are trying and they're making some improvements, but you know, so the kids can recognize that there are some improvements, but there's a ways to go. But these kids have been living this conflict for over 10 years, right? They're the oldest one is about to age out of their care. So it's been a long haul for these kids. So if whatever we can do to try and help settle these situations, hopefully earlier, so that it's not 10 years into it, so things can improve for children, that would be great. Katie, do you want to just finish this up here and talk a little bit? We've got 2 more minutes about some updates from.
Sure. So I'll just go quickly through this. We do have a couple of newer coordinators that are on our roster, particularly in family group conferencing, that can offer service in French or also Low German for the Mennonite Low German speaking community. For other language requests, we can also make that happen either with a practitioner that's in a different area that could travel to us or use services virtually, or we can also fund an interpreter to be provided as well. And like we mentioned before, case consultations are always available. You can contact me and we can talk it through, and then I can always assign an ADR practitioner to speak to you, or like Louise and Wendy mentioned, if you're having a hard time getting somebody to agree to participate in it, sometimes it really does help having that information come from one of our practitioners rather than CAS. So that's also an option as well. So you can just contact me for that information. Yeah, so basically our referral package that we need is the ADR-Link referral form, which is available on our website. It is a voluntary process, so we do need consent from all key parties ages 12 and up. And another part of the ADR process is to notify the OCL, Office of the Children's Lawyer, that an ADR referral is being made. They may or may not assign an OCL in those situations, but it's important to notify the family that this is part of the process so that it's not a surprise if and when an OCL is assigned, or so that the practitioner doesn't have to explain that to them. And you could just email or fax the referral information in, and I will go ahead and assign it to one of our available practitioners based on the information in the case. Perfect. So there is my contact information there. I think we had a question maybe if anyone wanted slides. You can definitely email me there at the ADR-Link at lfcc.on.ca, and I can provide that information from you. And the www.adr-link.ca, that's our website, and you can find the referral paperwork on there as well. Yeah, and I just wanted to thank Louise and Wendy for their help presenting today and for all their hard work that they do in ADR.
Thanks, Katie. Thanks. I just was going to mention too that there are brochures on the ADR-Link.ca website. So if you are having to explain it to a family, you can just go there, print that off, and then share that share that information with the family. I think that they're really helpful. So I think there's one on ADR in general, as well as one as the 3 approaches. So. Yeah. Yeah. So yes. So if I see people in the chat saying yes, you'd like it, but Katie, I think, is asking that you contact her first through her email.
Yeah, if you contact me through my email, I work better that way. I'll definitely remember to send it out to you guys that way.
Great. Good. Thanks everybody for attending today. And we will be doing one in the fall for the legal community. So if you know of any lawyers who would like to attend, please do so. And then we're also going to be doing one around using the 4th option, particularly the New Ways for Families program. Again, that's not happening to the fall. So thanks very much.